Hello to this video is called I didn't pay attention to the language of the report. Today was day 24 of the public inquiry to the federal government for invoking the Emergency Act on February 2022. Today is November 16, 2022. The agenda for today is overview, today's witnesses, and my point of view. We are doing the daily summary of testimonies in the inquiry that seeks to understand if Justin Castro had valid reasons to invoke the Emergency Act on February 14, 2022, and to determine if the powers that were used by the federal government exceeded the scope granted by the Act. Based on these findings, the lead commissioner will put forward a recommendation on both English and French by February of next year. Remember, this is not a trial and definitely is not an inquiry. To understand why I say this, you can go to my previous videos. All my videos can be found on YouTube, Lisa Prus Research, as well as my own website, lisaprusresearch.com, and the original inquiry and the live feed is shown in the link below. Today we had one dependent witness and one panel of two witnesses, all related to transportation. Please remember, I'm not doing a full analysis. I'm just grabbing some different aspects that have been interesting to me, and that's all I'm doing. I'm not doing the whole day anymore. We had John Osowski, the former president of the Canadian Border Service Agency, and in the direct examination, part one, there were two commission councillors making direct examination. As we know, the objective of this part is to exaggerate the risk of an international threat. So he provided a timeline. Here is the whole list of what he provided. And then on February 13, the ammunition that was and the guns that were seized in Coutts, and obviously some arrests took place. And the more they talk about it, the more it feels like a setup, because clearly the people who were in the convoy Freedom, or Freedom Convoy, I should say, never acknowledged any knowledge of these people, and these people have not been able to be linked to the protesters. So clearly, in my opinion, it just was a setup to make sure that they had a story behind as to why they were invoking the act. Some interesting findings. Canada has 117 ports of entry, and only 22 of those are set up for commercial transport, including livestock. So I found that very interesting, and Coutts is the only commercial in the Alberta-Montana region, as we know, and the next port of entry is going to be Saskatchewan or BC. So obviously it's not feasible for livestock because it's 8 hours away. So the blockage of Coutts actually can prove to be a little bit more complicated for the overall commerce with the U.S. than the one between Ambassador that we're going to analyze in a minute. So the charts of the traffic of commercial vehicles for the bridges for both Ambassador and the Blue Water were provided, and these include dates between January 15 to February 25 of 2022. So you can see how they are relatively close. It's an hour and a half, it's 110 kilometers. So if Ambassador would be closed, there was a little bit of an option with a point of entry through Blue Water Bridge. When John was asked if Blue Water was absorbing any traffic from the Ambassador, he said no. But what I did is I grabbed all the details and I created these charts, and it showed that it actually aided with almost 70%. And the reason why I say this is because I have an average of the number of vehicles that cross Ambassador Bridge, 3340, and Blue Water Bridge, 1972, between January 15 and February 7. Then February 8 to 14, you can see how the traffic was almost non-existent, and the average was 389 between the 8 and the 14. So the deficit between what it used to be the average and the moment that was, and the average on February 8 to 14 show us a deficit of almost 3,000 vehicles. And then here, you can see between the same period of 8 to 14, the average for Blue Water moved from 1972 to 3955. So the pickup was almost 70%, which contradicts exactly what the president was saying. No surprise there. Here, when they were shown some secret meeting notes from the IRG, there was a constant eye movement. He was scanning the space all the time. I feel as if this man was about to be kidnapped. I've never seen anyone being so observant. It's almost when you're watching a movie and you see Jason Bourne looking, where are the exits? Where am I going to go? Where are the number of doors? What's going on here? And I was looking into looking into body language and eyes moving from side to side can indicate shiftiness and lying, as if the person is looking for an escape route in case they are found out. So obviously, I don't know if he's lying or not, but his behavior is really odd. And then when he was asked if he provided his point of view, again in direct examination, for invoking the Emergency Act with a direct eye contact, he said no. So to me, that indicates that he was telling the truth. But again, obviously, I don't know. Then part two was the second commissioner counselor, and a miracle happened. He was all very stiff and very stoic and not a single smile during the whole first part. And then when he was asked, well, you're not really the president anymore, you are now retired, and then, as I say, a miracle happened. He actually smiled and said, well, I still feel like I am in charge. So he was asked about something called BLUF, bluff, and is a short form for bottom line upfront. And in February 14, the bluff, or the bottom line upfront, which is net a top line summary, it says, overall threat to CBSA officers and infrastructure is low. So clearly you're stating that by the moment when the Emergency Act was invoked, there was no real threat from his perspective. But also on February 14, in the same document, even though you're saying top line summary, there is risk that is low, it says, and I apologize, a little bit blurry, but it says there has been a significant operational impact that may result in a threat to Canada's economic security and prosperity. So he was asked, did you know that this concept is reason to invoke the act? And the answer was no. The question that I have is, how does this man don't know what is, again, the scope of his role and the implication of everything that goes through his desk? And then this is the title of the video, because to me this is incredible. The question was, why did it change from low to operational impact? And his answer was, I didn't pay attention to the language of the report. It was not meant to be in support to invoke the Emergency Act. Well, you're the president of the board there. So if you're not paying attention to the language, who should? Very bizarre. It just feels to me that all these witnesses are telling us consistently, I don't know what my job is about. I don't know what I'm doing. And as a result of that, I am creating a very, very damaging situation for the whole country. So here is the report, Intelligence Landscape. It says on February 15, after the Emergency Act was invoked, quote, caution should be exercised in light of recent reporting surrounding IMVE groups. So we talked about these groups yesterday because this is news to me. It means ideologically motivated violent extremism. Again, this word to me is so difficult to understand. I don't know why people use it. What does that even mean? So here, let's read. Proponents of ideological motivated violent extremism are driven by a range of influences rather than a singular belief system. In other words, you're not having only one cause, you have multiple causes. Well, right away, this contradicts everything, because the sole point of the whole convoy was remove the mandates. That's all they were asking. And then they say IMVE radicalization is more often caused by a combination of ideas and grievances resulting in personalized worldview that is inspired by a variety of sources. Once again, this contradicts everything we know about the convoy, everything that the witnesses have said. The only objective before arriving in Ottawa, while being in Ottawa, and even after Ottawa is remove the mandates. We want bodily autonomy for everyone, not only for us. So to me, using these words are just out of context and also very damaging. Here, I was looking at the blink rate when he was talking to the Freedom Convoy counselor in the cross-examination, and he was doing about double the norm. So when you are blinking excessively, it could be either a sign of stress or a sign of lying. But my question is he stressed because he's lying, or is he stressed because he's telling the truth and he shouldn't be telling the truth? So I don't know what is, but obviously it's not good. So let's look at the specific questions that made him uncomfortable. Question: you get information from the USA regarding threats to the USA and Canada. You provide that to the CBSA. Yes. He was very short in his answers. He was yes, no kind of person. The FBI or anyone else provided to the CBSA any information regarding threats? You have to ask CSIS. Remember, CSIS is the biggest agency of intelligence in Canada and the only one entitled to provide to the federal government any type of threshold to invoke the Emergency Act. Question. Nothing was brought to your attention as president of CBSA as a threat regarding the protest. Correct. Very important. There's not a threat. Question. At no time did you advise Cabinet that existed Section 2 CSIS threat. We're going to talk about this in a minute. Not in my purview to refer to CSIS threat. Question. If CSIS is the only agency providing intelligence and the agency says there is no threat and they were non-reported, then the Cabinet was never advised of CSIS Section 2 Security Act threat. Is that correct? You have to talk to the director of CSIS about that. So you can see how he was sitting down in all these secret meetings, but he's not really saying yes or no. He's redirecting. However, nobody seems to have heard that the federal government received the green light to invoke the Emergency Act. Remember, he's part of these secret meetings. He is sitting down with the federal government. He's sitting down with the prime minister. Next question. During your dealings with the political executive, they had been stating in public that the law enforcement agencies were advising them that the threshold for invoking the act were met. What law enforcement agency advised them to your knowledge? Answer. I'm not aware of who might have provided that advice. And the response of the Freedom Convoy Council was perfect. Right. Neither are we. Because remember, all the reports from the CSIS were saying we're not meeting the threshold. So let's read slowly everything once again regarding the threats to the security of Canada. You can stop the screen and read the other ones, but let's focus on the Section 2 that was the one where the counselor from the Convoy Freedom was focusing on. Foreign influence activities within or related to Canada that are detrimental to the interests of Canada and are clandestine or deceptive or involve a threat to any person. How is it clandestine or deceptive? They were clearly stating, we want the mandates to be removed. Threat to any person. Who was threatened? There are a lot of emails that they say that they were received by multiple people in the government. Again, I spoke about this yesterday. You just track the IPP, you go and arrest the person, and if there is no tracking, then there is no threat. End of the conversation. Here it says, but does not include lawful advocacy, protest, or dissent. Well, everybody keeps on saying this was a lawful protest, unless carried on in conjunction with any of the activities referred to in paragraphs A, espionage, to D, so activities related the support of threat of violence, and then undermining by covert and lawful acts and trying to overthrow the government of Canada. So once again, I'm going to go slowly over this again because there's no reason to invoke the Emergency Act. The more I hear about this, the more I ratify there's nothing here. Second set of witnesses, a panel of Michael Keenan and Christian D., Transport Canada. The objective, obviously, is to ratify the need of invoking the Act to deal with this, quote, situation. So here are the details of their job descriptions, and then the only thing they came up with was that tow trucks couldn't be secured until the Emergency Act was invoked. But we know from previous testimonies, particularly from the police force, that this statement is not true, that the trucks were going to be moving, number one. They were already moving, that the only reason they didn't finish moving was because the blockade from the police officers was not removed and some tow trucks were secured and they were already in the city. So this is not a true statement. My point of view. What I've heard so far in these 24 days is that the CSIS is the only agency responsible for providing information to invoke the Act by either espionage, foreign influence, violence for political, religious, or ideological reasons, and unlawful acts to overthrow the Canadian government. None of these were meeting the threshold. Espionage, none. Even the truckers were not coordinated between the regions. Foreign influence, none. They even stopped at the border anyone who wanted to join the truckers from the US. So today we heard that from the president of the border. Violence, minimal. From January 29 to February 14, we heard about this on day 8. I'm going to show the details in a minute. There were 4 charges of assault and 1 with weapon, 5 violent offenses. We have heard about 10,000 people, 30,000 people. We don't even know how many people. Nobody can give us a reliable number. So to have only 5 violent offenses is just clearly, as they say, lone wolves. These are not people from the convoy. And finally, unlawful acts to overthrow the Canadian government. None. If anything, the convoy was ratifying the government by wanting to speak with them. They wanted to speak with the Prime Minister to ask for the removal of the mandates. Here is the support of what I was telling you from the examination on Steve Bell. He was shown all the stats of all the charges, and between January 29 to February 13, only 4 assault charges, only 1 assault with weapon, only 5 violent offenses. And then the convoy counselor said that's not unprecedented violence. And then Bell responded, it's not the criminal code, but trauma they felt. So for the past 24 days, we've heard from multiple government witnesses, just from the police standpoint. You can see how many people we have heard from. Thomas Carrick, that is the OPP commissioner, so he's one of the highest people we heard on the stand. He actually has 32 years of experience in the police, and he said there was no credible intelligence that there was a threat to Canada. So again, he is the top person in this whole set of witnesses. And the only thing we have is from Steve Bell saying that we had a plan and we're going to execute it, and the act gave us the platform to do it. So that's the closest we have from all these witnesses justifying the invocation of the act. But to me, this is not a really good support. It's just saying we had a plan, we were going to do it, so we really don't need it. That's what I'm hearing. And interesting enough, from all these people, you can see how, quote, low we went in the scale and how high we went in the scale. So commissioner, you can see here, we had Patricia Ferguson, we had Thomas Carrick, and we had also Brenda Lucky from the RCMP. This is OPS, this is OPP. And you can see everybody, including all this inspector, for example, everyone was alone in the stand, except Brenda Lucky. Isn't that interesting? The most important person, the person with the highest level of authority, because that's the federal police, she was protected. I wonder why. These are the faces of some Canadians that only wanted bodily autonomy for all of us. And it's really tough to make these videos when I talk about them, because the reality is that all these people have got a lot of negative consequences. Their accounts were frozen. Some of them were with criminal charges. They still have cases open. One of these gentlemen, Jeremy McKenzie, is in jail. This gentleman, Pat King, has his accounts frozen up to this moment in time. This gentleman spent 10 days in isolation, and you can see he's a real alpha man. And he said it took him over a month to recuperate from that isolation. So it's just incredible. I don't understand why these are the real victims and they are not getting any benefit from this inquiry. They're being subpoenaed to appear, and everything that they have told us is going to be used against them. I'm certain of that. So many witnesses in 24 days, not a single person has proven the act was required. All we have is feelings. It's not in the criminal code, but the trauma was felt. Feelings. And paranoia about a lone wolf. So here we have from the Deputy Minister for the Public Safety and the Associate Deputy Cybersecurity that they were concerned about attacks by the lone wolf, and there were indications of potential violent acts. So you can see it's just feelings and paranoia. So feelings are not part of the criminal code, and a lone wolf cannot take a whole government down. Let's look at this comment from Brenda Lucky. We need to consider the other threading narratives. For example, if this was BLM, would policing be so hands-off? Very important to think about this. What does this mean except the government propaganda is treated differently than the real Canadians asking for the rights for bodily autonomy? That's what it means to me. Look at the images from BLM. Everyone on their knees, including this entity. But he couldn't stand up out of the cottage or wherever he was to talk to the truckers. So he goes on his knees for a violent movement, doesn't talk to real Canadians who were asking for the mandates to be removed. This is how Canadian citizens are treated when they want to remain autonomous over their bodies. I don't know if you have ever been stepped by a horse, but this looks absolutely absurd to me. This is what the Prime Minister of Canada thinks of us. And we are the racists. We are the extremists. I want you to stop the screen and read this and tell me who is the racist and who is the extremist. But we shouldn't expect any support from him. His allegiance, as we have already said in many of my last videos, is that it's not with us, is not with us, is not with us. What he swore to do when he became the Prime Minister of this country was to keep secrets from us. So we shouldn't expect anything except secrets. Thank you for listening.